Are you really ready? Lorenzo asked, pouring whiskey into a glass, then another for himself. Mattheo stood by the window in his flat, still in yesterday's clothes. The morning sun streamed across the floorboards like liquid gold. He didn't answer right away, just stared out at the city, waking up. Owls returning home with messages, shopkeepers rolling up shutters, lovers walking hand in hand down cobbled streets. 3 days from now, his wedding day. Finally, yeah. Low. Certain. Lorenzo studied him. You don't seem afraid. Mattheo turned slightly. Of course I'm afraid. Who wouldn't be? This isn't just marriage. It's forever with her. But it's different fear now. It doesn't make me want to run. It makes me want to stay and fight. Lorenzo nodded slowly, as if that answer had been worth waiting years to hear. Then you're ready, he said simply, lifting his glass. To Scarlet, and to not fucking it up this time. Mattheo laughed, a short burst of sound that carried no shame, and clinked his glass against Lorenzo's. To loving her better every day, he murmured, eyes drifting back toward the light, than I did the day before. The day before the wedding, they stood together in the garden at dusk. This was theirs. Out loud, in front of everyone who mattered. He wore a charcoal gray cloak lined with silver thread, simple but sharp. She stood before him in a long blue dressing robe, her hair loose and wild as ever around her shoulders. They weren't supposed to see each other today. It was tradition. But Scarlet never believed in rules that didn't matter, and neither did he anymore. So when she slipped through the ivy-covered archway and found him waiting, he smiled. Not big or showy, but soft. Like she had handed him peace instead of chaos for once. Hey, she whispered, stepping forward onto moss-covered stone, the wind catching strands of her hair like it wanted to join them, hands slipping into his pockets, even as every instinct told him to reach for her. She stopped just inches away and tilted her head slightly, eyes searching his face. You nervous? She asked quietly. He exhaled, a slow breath fogging briefly in cool air. Not about tomorrow. I know what I want. You. Her lips curved into a small smile, the kind only he ever saw. Shy, knowing. I am scared, he admitted after a pause, of taking you for granted again. She stepped closer then, one hand lifting slowly until it rested against his chest over his heart. You already don't, she said softly. Just showing up? That's how you prove it now. He closed his eyes briefly at that, as if absorbing the truth deep into bone and blood. Then opened them again. Then I'll keep showing up. For 50 years. For 80, for every damn sunrise after we're old. She laughed gently, the sound blending with distant crickets stirring beneath hedges, and reached up on tiptoe so she could press a kiss to corner of mouth. You better, she whispered, and when they pulled apart, they stayed close, foreheads nearly touching, breath mingling in shared warmth between two souls who had wandered far, and finally come home together. I want to give you something, he said quietly, turning toward the bench where his coat lay folded. She watched him curiously, eyes soft, as he reached into the inner pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. The cover was worn, dark brown with faint silver tracing along the edges, like stars half remembered in dreams. You've never seen this before, he said softly, stepping back toward her. I started it after we broke up. Her breath caught just slightly, as if she already knew what kind of pain lived between those pages. I wrote every day, he continued, voice low but steady. Not letters to send, not excuses, just truth. He opened it gently, turning past pages filled with messy script, ink blots from tears or trembling hands, moments of fury and grief scratched out only to be rewritten softer later. There's a page for every time I thought I lost you forever. For every night I drank too much trying not to feel it. For every morning I woke up high and forgot for one sweet second that you weren't beside me. He looked up at her now, gray eyes glistening but unbroken. And there are pages about how much I hated myself for hurting you. About how scared I was that change wouldn't be enough. That love like ours couldn't survive second chances. A beat passed. Then I didn't write this hoping you'd read it, he whispered, thumb brushing over an open page. I wrote it so I could face myself. So when or if I ever stood here again, I wouldn't be lying when I said I've changed. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached out, not for the journal yet, but for his hand, and then, will you let me read it? She asked softly. He nodded, quietly, humbly. Yes, but not tonight. Wait until after we're married. So whatever's inside doesn't feel like repayment, just proof. She looked down at the worn cover, the history etched into its spine, and then back up at him. At his tired eyes, his quiet strength, the boy who once ran now choosing stillness. And she smiled. But deep. You don't have anything left to prove, she whispered, pressing their foreheads together again. But yes, I'll read it. One day at a time. With everything else. A knock startled them both, then the soft sound of Lorenzo's voice on the other side of the ivy arch. It's getting late. Mattheo looked up, eyes flashing irritation and frustration, then back down at her. I wasn't ready yet, he whispered so soft she almost missed it. She laughed gently, a sound like bells against his skin, then reached out to brush away a strand of hair from his face. We have tomorrow, she said softly, and every day after. They stayed frozen like that a moment longer, caught between garden and moonlight, until another knock shattered the stillness. We should go, he said softly, reaching up to lace their fingers together gently. Before I stop caring what anyone thinks of me not following tradition. She took the journal from his other hand, then smiled slowly. I'll put this somewhere safe, she promised, pressing it against her chest, and read it after we're married. He nodded, hand still in hers, then brought it to his lips and kissed her knuckles softly. New Year's Eve, the wedding day. No fanfare, no crowds, just the quiet hum of snow falling through silver lace sky, blanketing the garden beneath a hush only winter knows. They stood there on the rooftop garden, the one Mattheo had made into something beautiful for her, where ivy curled like forgotten promises and rose branches wore frost like jewels. He wore a simple black coat with gray trim, tailored but unpretentious. She stepped toward him in deep sapphire robes that shimmered faintly under starlight, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. There were no parents on either side, only friends who loved them enough to bear witness. Draco stood close by in emerald green robes, grinning despite himself, as best man. Astoria leaned against him, smiling softly beside Regulus. Theo stood by Scarlett, her closest friend who stayed through all of the hard times, not just for her, but for Mattheo too. And Lorenzo? He stood just behind them all, not officiating, not speaking, just watching, with calm eyes, quiet approval, as if this moment was always meant to be. The moon hung high, a pale guardian above, and when she finally reached him, time slowed, not because magic demanded it, but because love did. Their fingers found each other instantly, as naturally as breath finding lungs after too long underwater. You showed up, he whispered, thumb brushing over her knuckle. Even though I didn't deserve you doing it twice. She smiled, not brightly, not dramatically, but deeply, eyes glistening under winter stars like oceans holding back tides just for him. I didn't come back twice, she said softly. I never really left. And then they turned to face whatever future waited beyond this frozen garden, as one. The wind held its breath. Snowflakes paused mid-fall, it seemed, hanging like stars caught between worlds. And when the kiss came, it wasn't loud, wasn't rushed. No fireworks exploded across the sky, no music swelled from hidden enchantments, just two souls meeting in silence. His lips brushed hers, once, softly, as if testing whether this moment were real. Then again, deeper this time, not with hunger but homecoming. They stayed that way for a long while, foreheads pressed together, bodies leaning into each other, learning how to fit perfectly in every broken place. Then she whispered against his mouth, I love you, husband. A laugh broke through him, raw and joyful, and he pulled back just enough to look at her properly under winter light. Wife. He breathed back, fingers tracing her jaw with reverence. You're really mine now. He smiled then, a slow unfurling of something true and unshakable. Behind them, Draco raised his glass high in silent toast. Theo clinked his against it with a smirk. Astoria wiped at her eyes delicately beside Regulus, who stood smiling faintly beneath the weight of witnessing something rare. Not just a marriage forged after heartbreak, but one rebuilt with patience, with humility, with love not as fire, but as flame that doesn't burn out. And far above them all, the sky cracked open. A single streak of silver split the night, a shooting star low across constellations ancient beyond memory, as if even magic itself leaned down to whisper, bless these two who dared return. 2 years later. Autumn sun streamed through open window panes, lighting up a cozy nursery filled with baby toys and colorful blankets. A mobile of charmed stars danced softly, twinkling like distant promises above an old oak crib. The room was quiet, all but for one sound, soft, steady crying from the bassinet beneath. He padded over before his wife woke, dressed hastily and barefoot, hair tousled from sleep, and scooped their daughter into his arms, rocking slowly back and forth without a word until her sobs quieted into hiccups against his chest. Then he carried her to the rocking chair in the corner, the one worn smooth from nightly use, and settled down gently, wrapping them both in a thick blue blanket embroidered with tiny stars. Her little fingers curled around his thumb, so small, so trusting. He looked down at her, this miracle who had just turned 8 months old, with dark tufts of hair already showing hints of his gray eyes beginning to emerge, and felt something shift again inside him. Not love, he had loved her from the moment he first heard her heartbeat on a spell mirror at St. Mungo's, but gratitude for this second chance, for healing, for life growing where once there was only loss. "Hey," he whispered, brushing a soft kiss across her forehead. "You're wide awake too, huh?" She gurgled sleepily, eyes fluttering open just enough to catch moonlight mingling with dawn, and suddenly, it wasn't just their daughter staring back at him, it was Scarlet. In every blink, every breath, a sob rose, but not sadness, joy. "I promise you," his voice cracked slightly. No chaos, no games, no running. His lips pressed gently against tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb as quiet tears slipped free, falling where only night could see. "I'll stay, and I'll love your mummy and you with everything I have." Outside, frost still clung to window edges like old ghosts reluctant to leave winter behind, but here was warmth, here was peace, here was family. Not because fate willed it, but because two broken people chose to keep coming back, and that made all the difference. He didn't move for a long time, just sat there rocking slowly with his daughter's quiet sighs blending into his heartbeat, until he heard familiar footsteps behind them. Turning, he found Scarlet standing in the doorway, dressed in a faded nightdress and leaning against the frame with eyes softened by love. "You're supposed to wake me," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "You needed the sleep." She moved quietly across the room, bare feet silent on wooden floor, and knelt beside them, resting her hand gently on their daughter's back. "She's awake?" she asked softly, voice still thick with sleep. "Just checked in," he whispered back. "I wanted to make sure she was okay before I let you see her." Scarlet looked up at him, then blue eyes catching morning light spilling through the window. Like every day with him was still a gift she hadn't quite gotten used to. "You do that every time," she murmured. "Check first." He shrugged slightly, his usual way of downplaying what meant so much. "I don't want her to cry alone." She leaned in and pressed a soft kiss against his shoulder, lingering just long enough for warmth to spread between them both, then shifted closer, wrapping it around his waist as they sat together in the quiet glow of dawn. "She has your eyes," Scarlet said after a moment, watching their daughter sleep peacefully now against his chest. "But when she smiles, she looks like you," he finished for her, voice low and reverent. Another beat passed, a fullness too deep for words, until he finally whispered, "Thank you for giving me this life." Her fingers tightened around his side, and then, soft as breath, "I didn't give it to you." She turned and kissed him lightly on the lips, tender and sure. "We built it together." The sun was high outside now, morning bright and sharp-edged against curtains still pulled tight, as they stumbled toward the kitchen, half-dressed and half asleep, both giggling at nothing as they tried not to trip over each other's feet. "Slow down," Scarlet hissed, trying not to drop the steaming mugs in her hands. "You know I can't walk with my eyes closed." He laughed, just a little too loud, and nearly ran smack into the wall. She had to steady the coffee at the last minute, cursing under her breath. "Idiot." "You love that about me," he teased back, grinning as he steadied another cup himself. "I love that you have the self-preservation instincts of a concussed pigeon." He chuckled, leaning a hip against the counter as she set the mugs down. "I'm just embracing life." By running into walls, she shot him a skeptical look. "It's called a speed run, shortest distance between 2 points. "Sure," she drawled, "if you're running into things." He laughed again, the sound warm and easy and familiar as sunlight. "You love that about me," he said again, softer now, and the playful edge in his voice dropped just slightly across the steam rising between them. She paused, mug halfway to her lips, and met his gaze, and for a heartbeat too long to ignore, everything stilled. The way she tilted her head, the quiet curve of her mouth, the look in her eyes, deep blue and endless, that always made him feel like she could see every part of him no one else ever bothered trying to find. Then, "Yeah," she whispered, "I really do. Not because you're reckless, but because even when you crash, You always get back up. Her fingers curled gently around the side of his mug and slowly pushed it toward him. You don't fall alone anymore. He exhaled, slowly, of letting go of something heavy, only just realized he'd been carrying all along. Then, he reached across, took her hand in both of his, and brought it to his lips without breaking eye contact. No, he murmured, kissing each knuckle softly. I haven't since I found my way back to you. Time passed. The years felt short, but the days were long. The hours after dawn stretched out in long, quiet moments. She dozed while he dozed, drifting in and out of sleep until finally, hours later, he sat up, blinking blearily through the first shafts of sunlight. His eyes burned, his body ached, and his mind still felt like slow honey. But a smile tugged at the corners of his lips as the night came back into focus, and he looked toward the crib, now occupied by a perfect little bundle wrapped in soft blue. He stood, limbs cramped from sitting in a chair all night, and crossed silently over to the crib, careful not to wake anyone else. The crib rocked back and forth, its gentle motion still echoing the soothing rhythm he'd rocked their daughter to sleep with hours before. Now, though, the newborn's dark hair was still a little mussed, her brow wrinkled ever so slightly, and Mattheo found himself smiling again, gently smoothing out the tiny furrows between her eyes with the pat of a finger. Hey, little moon, he whispered, voice rough with sleep and emotion both. You're really here? She made a small sound, a breathy sigh, like a question being answered, and her hand flinched open beside her head. Instinctively, he placed his pinky into her tiny grip, and when she curled around it like she had been doing it forever, his heart shattered all over again. Welcome to us, he murmured, crouching down beside the crib so his face was level with hers. You don't know how long we waited for you, how much we needed you. Outside, snow still dusted the rooftops. Frost clung to window panes like silver lace. But inside, warmth pulsed in quiet waves, blankets stacked high, a fire crackling low, and the hush of new life settling into old hearts. He stayed there, kneeling on cold floorboards for what felt like hours, just watching, until soft footfalls came from behind. I thought I'd find you here, she said quietly, stepping barefoot into the room. He didn't turn, not yet. Just kept gazing at their daughter as Scarlet moved up behind him, slipping one arm gently around his shoulders while resting her head against his back. They're both asleep now? He asked softly. Her voice was thick with fatigue and peace. Theo took Olivia for a walk in the garden earlier. He gave me time to nap. He nodded slowly, then leaned back slightly into her touch, as if letting himself be held by more than just one person, by love itself, by everything they'd rebuilt together. We did good, he whispered after a long silence. She smiled against his shoulder blade, small but sure. Yeah, we really did. Then, without prompting, without needing words, she slipped down beside him onto the floor, facing their daughter together, and they stayed that way, kneeling, watching, breathing in time, two parents, in awe of second chances, of healing that came not through magic or miracles alone, but through choosing each other every single day. The house felt alive then, warm with sunlight and firelight both, and their daughter still slept, oblivious to the world still waking outside. They stayed there for another few minutes, knees pressed into cold wood, until finally, I'm gonna soar if I stay on this floor much longer, Scar muttered sleepily. He huffed a laugh, tired but happy. Bed sounds like a good idea. He stood slowly, careful not to let his knees crack too loudly, and then, after a moment, extended a hand to her. She took it, standing too and leaning for a moment against him, still half asleep on her feet. Your face is stubble, she muttered, reaching out idly to scratch at his jaw. Looks good. He caught her fingers in his, pressing a kiss to her palm and whispering against knuckles, You look perfect. She smiled again, that faint, sleepy curve of her lips that warmed him from the inside out, and then yawned suddenly, covering her mouth with her free hand. He chuckled softly, pulling her close and guiding her toward the door. Come on, he teased, kissing the top of her head. Before you fall asleep right here. She leaned heavily into him as they walked, barefoot and drowsy, down the hallway toward their room. One arm stayed looped around his waist. They moved together in quiet sync. At the doorway she paused, not to stop, but to turn. And then, without a word, she pulled him back gently by the wrist, led him into their bedroom, then further, until his back met wall. Her eyes found his, tired but glowing with that familiar spark of fire beneath calm waters. And just like that, the sleepiness melted away from her face, replaced by something deeper, intent. Hunger. Need. She stepped closer, placed one hand flat on his chest, and looked up at him like he was air and water both. Stay here, she whispered, voice rougher now. Don't move. He nodded once, not trusting words. She rose slightly on her toes, the height difference still something she fought playfully every time, and brushed a slow, deep kiss across his lips, not hurried, not desperate, but full of meaning, like each touch carried memory. Then another, softer this time, lower, near the corner of mouth, then down to throat, where pulse jumped wildly under skin at just being near her again after such long night apart. I missed you tonight, she murmured against neck, breath warm. Not because you were gone, but because I wanted you here, with me, in this moment. His hands had settled low on hips without thought, the way they always did when trying not to take too much, or give too little. I didn't go far, he breathed, voice thick. I was watching our daughter, and I love you for it. Another kiss, light, as she pulled back slightly. But right now, she tugged gently at his bottom lip with her teeth. I need my husband. Something broke open inside him then. Not pain, not guilt, but pure want wrapped in love so fierce it bordered on sacred. So when she kissed him again, a real kiss this time, all restraint shattered, his arms wrapped tightly around her waist, pulling her against him like she might somehow vanish if he dared let go. And his head fell back against wall as he let her take control. Her lips traveled across his jaw, down his neck, kissing skin like she could memorize every familiar place. And he was lost to her then. To the feel of her hands in his hair, the warmth of her skin, her tongue dancing across his collarbone. He groaned softly when she found that sensitive spot just behind his ear, teeth nipping gently at his earlobe, and his fingers dug into her hips reflexively. Scarlett, he whispered, if you keep that up, we're not making it to the bed. He could actually feel her smirk, a quick curve of her lips against his throat. And then she pulled back suddenly, leaving his lips chasing after like they'd forgotten how to breathe on their own. His eyes fluttered open as she stepped back, leaving him leaning heavily on the wall for support. She was watching him, lips red, eyes burning, cheeks flushed as she unbuttoned her shirt. He'd seen her strip 1,000 times before, kissed her bare skin when nothing else mattered, held her, worshipped her, loved her like sunlight, moonlight, and fire. But right then, she took his breath away. Each button undone was deliberate, each movement slow. The fabric slipped from her shoulders, drifting like a whisper to the floor, and there she stood, pale skin glowing in the low light, faint stretch marks across hips, soft traces of Luna's arrival, a small scar above her right breast from a hex gone wrong back in aura training, and every single part perfect, not because flawless, but because hers, because it told stories, because it had survived storms and still chose him. He pushed off the wall then, no hesitation, no words, just steps forward until he could pull her into his arms again, mouth crashing down on hers with everything he had held back for months. Longing, desperation, a love too big to live quietly inside chest anymore. His hands roamed up her sides slowly, reverently, as if rediscovering sacred ground, and when they found scars, he kissed them, one by one, with care, with need. Like they were stars guiding him home, the stretch marks, gentle press of lips over skin that stretched and gave life, the hex scar, long, a slow kiss just above heart, as if sealing an unspoken vow. Her hip bone, the bite mark she'd left on his shoulder months ago, still faintly visible. He smiled into touch before murmuring, "You're so beautiful." She shivered, in more than just cold or pleasure, but something deeper. "I'm Mark," she whispered, pulling slightly away to look at him. "Not perfect." His eyes met hers, steady, unwavering, and said with absolute certainty, "Neither am I." And thank Merlin for that. Then he drew her back in, because actions would always speak louder than even the truest words, and showed her, with touch and taste and breathless silence, just how deeply he loved every piece. 3 years later, he'd spent most of the morning reading on the deck of their summer cottage, a half-empty cup of coffee getting cold beside him, while sunlight streamed through the trees. Olivia and Luna building a sand castle from the fine gray sand of the beach. Every now and then, an excited peal of laughter would echo off the water. He didn't notice at first. The book in his hands, ancient runes, something Theo had lent him to pass the quiet hours, held just enough of his attention that he missed the subtle shift around him. But then, a pause. Too long between sentences. His eyes lifted from the page, slowly. And there she was, standing by the edge of their garden, where wildflowers grew thick and untamed after summer rain, dressed in a loose linen dress that fluttered like wings in the breeze. One hand resting low on her belly, the gentle swell barely visible beneath fabric, but unmistakable now. She wasn't looking at him. just gazing out toward the sea, her face soft with thought, lips parted slightly as if holding back words not meant for air yet. He felt it before he understood it, a tightening in his chest, not fullness, like love had grown too vast for bones to contain. Without a sound, he set the book down, left his coffee cold, rose from the chair with bare feet, stepping quietly over warm wood, and came up behind her slowly, his arms wrapping gently around her waist as he rested his chin on her shoulder. "Hey," he murmured, voice low and warm against her skin. "Did I miss something?" She leaned into him instantly, like she'd been waiting all morning just to be held this way, and let out a soft breath. "No," she whispered, one hand covering his where it rested over hers on her stomach. "Not missing, just feeling." A beat passed, filled only by wind through tall grass and distant laughter of their girls playing further down shore. Then he kicked. Mattheo stilled. "What?" She smiled then, a small, secret thing, and guided his palm lower, more firmly against curve of belly where new life moved quietly beneath layers skin. "There," she said softly as another tiny ripple pressed outward under fingertips. And suddenly, there, underneath my hand, he could feel it, a faint but undeniable pulse, a flutter like wings inside storm clouds forming dawnlight. He couldn't speak, didn't trust himself to say anything without breaking apart right there behind her, with sun warming our backs and ocean humming ancient songs ahead. So instead, he pressed a kiss into hair beside ear, held them both tighter than before, and whispered, "I can feel you. Not I love you," though that lived heavy beneath every word. Not you're amazing, though she was, in ways language failed completely. No, just, I see you. I know this moment. I am here. For every heartbeat you carry within. Because some things don't need grand declarations when silence says everything behind them. Their daughters squealed as Luna dumped an entire bucket of seawater onto Livia's castle, one laugh dissolving into chaos-filled joy. But here, in the space between breaths, it was sacred, private, fragilely perfect. After long stillness, "You okay?" she asked softly, turning slightly so she could see part of face tucked against shoulder. His throat worked once, heavy with emotion, but when he looked at her, eyes glistening not with sadness but wonder, "Yeah," he breathed, thumb stroking slow circles over place our sun hid inside night and day dreams. "Better than okay. I'm just in awe of you, of this, that we get another chance to do right by someone else's heart." She was quiet for a moment, eyes searching his, but then smiled softly, turning fully in his arms and letting her head rest against his chest. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat, a familiar comfort. "He's lucky," she murmured softly, "have you." He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, drawing her closer still, as if shielding them both from the world beyond their little corner of paradise. "I'm luckier," he murmured against the top of her head. "For you." Later that night, the girls were asleep, sand still dusting their toes, hair tangled with salt and wind. Scarlet tucked them in together, Livia with her stuffed hippogriff, Luna clutching a seashell she'd found at low tide, and kissed each child slowly, like every breath they took was a gift to be honored. Mattheo stood in the doorway watching them, his wife, their daughters, this life, so quiet now, so full. When Scarlet turned off the lantern and stepped back into the hall, he reached for her hand without speaking. Their fingers intertwined instantly, worn smooth by time and trust. They walked barefoot through the darkened cottage, moonlight painting silver streaks across wooden floors. No words needed, not yet. Out on the back porch, the one overlooking cliffs where sea met sky, they sat side by side on an old swing chair draped in soft blankets. The ocean breathed below, slow, eternal. He pulled her gently onto his lap, arm wrapping securely around her waist as she leaned into him, head finding its familiar place beneath his chin. For long moments there was only silence. Not empty, but rich with presence. With love lived not in grand gestures, but here, in stillness shared between two souls who had fought their way back to each other. "He already has your laugh," she said softly, staring out at waves catching starlight. "I heard it today when Livia tried to walk on all fours like a crab." A small chuckle escaped him, but it wasn't just amusement. It was wonder. That something of him could live inside another person so completely innocent, so unafraid. He felt the flutter of her smile against his neck, and his fingers traced an idle path along the curve of her waist, coming to rest on her belly. "He'll have your eyes," he said quietly. "And your stubbornness." He laughed softly, not denying the truth of it. "He'll be as stubborn as both of us." And then, after a moment, "But One of her hands found his where it rested on the growing life between them, fingers weaving together. "He'll have your kindness." Her voice was so quiet, nearly a whisper, but he heard it like a promise, and he tightened his hold. He turned his head slowly, brushing a kiss into the side of her neck, soft, lingering, before resting his cheek against her temple. "He'll have your strength," he murmured, "and your heart." A breath. And then, "and mine too, if he wants it." She shifted slightly in his arms, just enough to tilt her face toward him. "You already gave it to him," she whispered, "the moment you chose to stay." His throat tightened, not with words this time, but with feeling so deep it had no name, because she was right. He hadn't just stayed for Scarlet, or even for the girls. He'd stayed for all of them, for the life they were building. One quiet morning, one shared glance, one act of courage at a time. And now, another heartbeat grew beneath their joined hands, a new dream taking root in love that refused to give up. So he held on tighter, rocking gently under stars that bore silent witness, knowing nothing would ever break this again. Not distance, not fear, not even death could touch what they'd rebuilt from ashes. Because this wasn't just survival anymore. This was home. Time continued on. The girls grew before his very eyes. Mattheo and Scarlet had welcomed their son, Theo, 3 years ago now. Their family was complete. The sun was just rising as Mattheo stepped out onto the back porch, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. The garden was still damp with morning dew. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of birdsong was beginning to wake the world. He took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp October air, then leaned against the doorframe. A slight smile touched his lips as he watched his daughter, dressed in jeans, a red hoodie, and rain boots, poking around the garden, collecting fallen leaves. Olivia turned, her blue eyes bright in the morning light. Her hair, long and dark like Scarlet's, was half braided, one side slipping loose with a few leaves tangled in it. "What are you doing, love?" he called out softly. She held up her hands proudly. "Pumpkin leaves." "I found them under the hedge," Mattheo chuckled, stepping down into the garden. "Ah yes, the secret pumpkin vault." She giggled at that. "It's not secret, it's right there." "Exactly," he said solemnly, crouching beside her to inspect the pile with mock seriousness. "Only true adventurers can see it." Her laughter rang through the yard like bells. Then she paused suddenly, eyes narrowing slightly, and pointed at him. "Daddy?" "Mm-hmm." He looked up from their leaf investigation, smiling still. "You used to run away, didn't you?" The question came out of nowhere, not accusatory, but curious, like she'd overheard something whispered between grown-ups when they thought no one was listening. His breath caught just for a second, not sharply, deeply, like when someone touches an old scar you forgot was there. But he didn't flinch, didn't look away. Instead, he sat back on his heels, looked directly into those familiar blue eyes, and nodded once. "Yeah," he said gently, voice low and honest, "I did. Long ago." She tilted her head, thoughtful now, as if processing this new piece of information about someone she'd only ever known as steady as stone. "Why?" she asked simply. He exhaled slowly and chose his words carefully. "Because sometimes people get scared. They think love means never being hurt. But they don't realize that staying even when it's hard is how love grows strong." Olivia frowned slightly, then reached forward and took his hand without hesitation, placing a single crumpled yellow leaf in his palm. "For you," she said softly, "to help remember not to run again." His heart cracked wide open, not painfully, but beautifully, like sunrise breaking after years of stormy nights. Tears welled, not because he felt guilt, but because this child, who hadn't even been born yet during those darkest days, had just offered him forgiveness without knowing how deep its meaning ran. So he closed his fingers gently around that tiny leaf, then pulled her into a hug, so tight it lifted her off the ground for just a second, putting her back down. "You're right," he whispered against her hair. "No more running. I promise." And somewhere behind him, in the kitchen window, Scarlet stood silently, a teacup frozen halfway to lips, her eyes full, not of sorrow, but peace. They stayed like that for a while, Olivia wrapped securely in her father's arms, leaves swirling around them like golden confetti caught in sunbeams. The moment felt suspended, timeless, the first rays of day painting the world with promise. Then she let go, standing back to look at him again. "Can we look for more leaves?" He laughed softly, ruffling her hair. "Of course, love. We can search the whole garden." Olivia bounded ahead, her little boots crunching through fallen leaves, as she ran toward the old apple tree where Luna and Theo were already playing under the watchful eye of Madame Pint's enchanted scarecrow. Mattheo stood slowly, brushing dirt from his trousers, his fingers still closed tightly around that small yellow leaf Livia had given him. He didn't throw it away, didn't forget it. Instead, he slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat, right next to his wand and a worn photograph of Scarlet from their wedding day. A reminder. It's not because he needed saving, but because love isn't measured in grand moments alone, but in quiet ones like this. A child's hand offering forgiveness before she even knew what it meant, a father choosing to stay. Back on the porch, the teacup was gone from the windowsill. And Scarlett, she stepped outside barefoot, her long dark brown hair loose over her shoulders, wearing one of Mattheo's old Quidditch jerseys, and moved silently behind him until her arms wrapped around his waist. He leaned back into her touch without speaking, just breathed and felt. After a long moment, she whispered against his shoulder, "She gave you a leaf?" He nodded. "Yeah. For me too," she said softly. His breath caught. Then he turned slowly, in that slow way only deep love allows, and cupped her face in both hands, thumb brushing gently over freckled nose just beneath soft blue eyes. "You gave me everything," he murmured, voice thick with memory. "Long before I deserved any of it." She smiled, a quiet, knowing thing that reached all the way to her soul, and whispered, "And now? You've earned every second, so let yourself be happy." Outside, the children laughed beneath ancient trees. Golden light poured across cobblestone paths, and somewhere beyond garden walls, life went on as life does. But here was home, not built by perfection, but by choice, every single day, to love, to hold on when storms come, and sometimes that's more than enough. The morning slipped into afternoon with golden ease. Livia came barreling back through the garden gate, face flushed, hair wild with wind and leaves, one boot missing, shouting over her shoulder at Luna and Theo. "You can't catch me! I'm faster than a snitch!" Mattheo laughed from his seat on the porch steps where he'd stayed wrapped in quiet contentment, still cradling Scarmth against his side. Then he stood slowly, offering her a hand up, and brushed a soft kiss across her knuckles before walking out to meet their daughter halfway. "Oi," he called, arms wide. "No one outruns their father when he's got broomstick reflexes." Livia shrieked with laughter and turned to sprint in the opposite direction, only to trip over her own shoelace and tumble gently into a pile of raked leaves, sending them flying like sparks in autumn light. Mattheo didn't hesitate. He dove after her, laughing, rolling through the crisp golden mound beside her until both of them were breathless and covered in bits of foliage. "You okay?" he asked, brushing a leaf from her cheek, eyes full of warmth. She nodded fast. "I meant to do that. It's called a leaf slide." He barked out a laugh. "Of course it is," and pulled her up, swinging her into his arms so she squealed again before setting her on his shoulders like always. "Liv," he said, adjusting his grip as she giggled wildly above him. "If you're gonna challenge me, at least wear both boots." "Fine," she declared, kicking one foot playfully. "But next time I'm bringing Luna. She's got faster feet." "Then I'll bring reinforcements," he shot back with mock seriousness. "Theo's already training under me. The future keeper material." Scarlet stepped out onto the porch then, barefoot still, sunlight catching every shade in her dark brown hair, and leaned against the frame with a quiet smile, watching them. Her husband, her children, their laughter tangled together like ivy climbing stone walls built from years of patience and love. And just as Mattheo turned, with Livia perched high on his shoulders, the wind caught just right. A single yellow leaf drifted down between them, landing softly on Livia's head. She paused, then slowly reached up and plucked it free and handed it back to him. "For you," she whispered solemnly this time, not because he needed saving, not because he'd failed, but because she loved him, because she trusted him now completely. So he took it again, this second leaf, as if receiving something sacred, and tucked it gently beside the first one, next to his heart.